Welcome back, everyone, to another story. I truly hope you enjoy this one. I wasn't dragged into becoming someone else. No one forced me into a new identity. There was never some dramatic moment where my entire world cracked apart in a single instant. Instead, it happened quietly, slowly, in ways so subtle I could ignore them at first. It was like noticing a tiny tear in your favorite sweater. Harmless at first, barely worth thinking about. But once your fingers catch the thread and begin to pull, the unraveling becomes impossible to stop. Before you realize it, the whole thing has come undone in your hands. That's how it started for me. I was Leo, 21 years old, certain of who I was. And it all began with a t-shirt. It was my favorite one, an old faded gray thing with the peeling logo of some band I barely listened to anymore. The cotton was soft from years of washing, the collar stretched loose, the fabric worn thin enough to feel familiar against my skin. It was the kind of shirt I wore without thinking. Comfortable. Safe. Mine. That morning, though, it felt wrong. I stood in the narrow space between my bed and closet, half awake in the pale light filtering through the blinds. When I pulled the shirt over my head, the fabric didn't fall the way it always had. It rested differently. Clung differently. Instead of hanging straight against my torso, it curved, draped across subtle contours that hadn't been there before. I frowned and tugged at the hem. Did Mom shrink it? That was the first explanation my mind offered, quick and desperate in its simplicity. Maybe the dryer had ruined it. Maybe the fabric had tightened somehow. But when I touched it, it felt exactly the same. The same softness. The same loose tag scratching faintly against the back of my neck. The same shirt. Slowly, I turned toward the full-length mirror attached to my closet door. And my stomach dropped. The room around me was still familiar. The faint smell of detergent hanging in the air, the dust motes drifting lazily through shafts of sunlight, the quiet creak of old floorboards settling beneath my feet. But the reflection staring back at me felt like someone else. My shoulders looked narrower. The hard angles of my jaw seemed softened somehow, as if someone had blurred the edges while I slept. My face carried a strange delicacy I didn't recognize. Even my eyes looked different, whiter, brighter. There was a vulnerability there that didn't belong to me. Cold panic slid down my spine. I took a stumbling step backward, my breath catching in my throat. For one horrifying second, it felt like I was looking at a stranger wearing my skin. Then the floorboard behind me creaked. I spun around. My mother stood in the doorway, one hand wrapped around a half-empty mug of coffee. Her face was calm, unreadable, as though she'd been expecting this moment. But she wasn't looking directly at me. Her eyes were fixed on my reflection, almost like she was seeing someone else entirely. "You don't need to be afraid," she said softly. Her voice barely disturbed the stillness of the room. I flinched. The words hit me like stones. She lifted the mug for another slow sip, her gaze never leaving the mirror. "No matter how much you hide from it," she murmured, "your body has already begun choosing for you." The breath left my lungs. "What?" My voice cracked. The single word sounded thin and childish. She finally looked at me directly and offered a small, sad smile. Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps fading down the hallway. I stood frozen. Her words lingered like smoke. "Your body has already begun choosing." It was nonsense. Vague, cryptic nonsense, the kind of strange, half-philosophical thing she sometimes said. And yet my hands were shaking. I tore the shirt off so violently the fabric twisted around itself. I balled it up and hurled it into the corner of the room. Then I yanked an oversized hoodie over my head like armor. The thick fabric hid everything. But even beneath it, I could still feel the ghost of that gray cotton clinging to curves I refused to acknowledge. The days that followed became an exercise in avoidance. I learned not to look at mirrors. I dressed in darkness. I let the bathroom steam fog every reflective surface before stepping out of the shower. I buried myself beneath layers, baggy hoodies, loose sweatpants, anything shapeless enough to erase me. But no amount of fabric could stop what was happening. The changes kept coming, quietly, relentlessly. My skin grew softer, almost impossibly smooth beneath my fingertips. sensitive in ways it had never been before.
Even my scent changed.
One afternoon, while washing my hands, I caught a faint sweetness in the air. At first, I thought it was the soap. Then realization hit me. It was me. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Something lighter had replaced the musky familiarity I'd always known. A primal part of my brain recognized the difference instantly. And terror followed. Then my closet changed. I reached for my favorite pair of worn blue jeans one morning and froze. They were gone. Not misplaced.
Gone.
I tore through hangers, yanking clothes aside in rising panic. My black pair was missing too. In their place hung unfamiliar garments made from sleek, fluid fabrics. Dark leggings. Soft-fitted pants. Materials that slipped through my fingers like water. No thick seams. No rough denim. Nothing masculine. My breathing quickened. She had done this. My mother. She was replacing my life piece by piece, nudging me towards something I didn't understand. I stormed into the living room, fury trembling through me. She sat curled in her chair, reading as if nothing were wrong. "Where are my jeans?" My voice cracked on the demand. She looked up calmly. "Which ones, sweetheart?" "My blue pair. The black ones too." "What is this stuff in my closet?" She marked her page and closed the book. "I thought something softer might suit you better." The casualness of her answer ignited something inside me. "I don't want softer." The words exploded out of me. "I want my clothes. Stop touching my things." Heat rushed into my face. I sounded childish, pathetic, but she didn't raise her voice, didn't react at all. She only looked at me with that same unbearable calm. "Leo," she said gently, "the harder you fight yourself, the louder the truth becomes." Another impossible answer. Another cloud of cryptic nonsense I couldn't grab hold of. I turned and fled to my room, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frame. It solved nothing. The pressure in my chest only grew heavier. And then the pajamas changed too. My old basketball shorts vanished. My oversized sleep shirts disappeared. In their place were soft matching sets in muted shades, cream, gray, navy. Not obviously feminine, but not masculine either. Something in between. And the worst part? They felt incredible. The smooth fabric soothed my increasingly sensitive skin in ways my old clothes never had. It was a betrayal. My own body was welcoming this transformation even as my mind rejected it. One sleepless night, tangled in unfamiliar softness, I lay staring at the ceiling while panic spiraled through me. My thoughts raced. What is happening to me? Am I sick? Am I losing my mind? Then, absent-mindedly, my hand drifted to my chest and froze. Beneath the thin cotton, there was softness. A yielding swell where flatness should have been. Not muscle. Something else. I jerked my hand away like I'd touched fire. My pulse thundered in my ears. The denial shattered in an instant. This was real. And beneath the panic came something worse. Curiosity. A magnetic, shameful urge to touch again. To know. That desire terrified me more than anything else. For a week, I drifted through the house like a ghost, avoiding mirrors, avoiding my mother, avoiding myself. Until Saturday morning. I stood staring blankly into the refrigerator when she appeared beside me. The air changed instantly. Heavy. Tense. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Leo," she said quietly. I shut the fridge door and turned to face her. There was sadness in her expression now. Real sadness. "I just want you to stop fighting your own body." I swallowed hard. "I don't know what you mean." The lie sounded weak even to me. She didn't challenge it. Instead, she gestured toward the living room. Folded neatly on the armchair was a small stack of clothing. Leggings. And beside them, a pale, seamless training bra. Simple. Soft. Terrifying. "Just try them," she said. "No one will see." 5 minutes. My throat tightened. "I can't." Her eyes softened. "If you hate it, take it off. We never mention it again." Then she left. And I stood there alone with the choice. My hands shook as I picked up the clothes. The fabric was impossibly smooth, cool against my skin. I locked myself in my bedroom,
Pulled off my hoodie, my sweats.
stood trembling in the silence. The leggings came first. They slid over my legs like liquid, hugging every contour. Not restrictive, not wrong, just natural. Then the bra. I stared at it forever before forcing myself to pull it over my head. The straps tangled awkwardly before settling into place. And then, stillness. No discomfort. No humiliation. Just gentle pressure. Support. The fabric rested against the soft fullness of my chest like it had always belonged there. My shoulders relaxed instinctively. My posture straightened. Relief washed over me, so suddenly it made my knees weak. And that relief filled me with shame. Slowly, I looked up. The mirror reflected someone familiar and foreign all at once. The leggings streamlined my body. The bra subtly reshaped my silhouette. And staring back at me was still Leo, but softer, delicate, beautiful in ways I had never allowed myself to imagine. And for the first time, I didn't look away. The gentle curve of my chest no longer looked like something unnatural, no longer seemed like some flaw I had to conceal beneath layers of heavy fabric and denial. The soft support of the bra held everything in place, shaping it in a way that made impossible sense. It looked right.
No.
The thought struck immediately, sharp and defensive. It doesn't. The denial came automatically, a reflex born from years of habit. But even as my mind resisted, my body refused to cooperate with the lie. My breathing had deepened. The constant knot of tension that had lived between my shoulders for months had begun to unravel, loosening thread by thread. I rolled my shoulders experimentally and felt a fluid ease I hadn't known in years. I stood and crossed the room. Even that simple movement felt different. There was no stiffness, no resistance. My body moved smoothly, naturally, as though every step had finally found the rhythm it was meant to follow. When I sat down on the edge of the bed, I became acutely aware of how I sat, how my legs settled, how my back straightened, how my hands naturally folded into my lap. It wasn't practiced. It wasn't imitation. It simply happened. And somehow, it felt like remembering something I had forgotten, rather than learning something new. The shame still lingered. A hot pulse of discomfort burned low in my stomach. But now it had competition. Another sensation had risen to challenge it, something quieter, softer, infinitely more dangerous. Comfort. Not temporary comfort like sinking into familiar old sweatpants after a long day. This was something deeper. It felt like stepping into a home I had never seen before and somehow knowing exactly where every room was. My throat tightened. I stared into the mirror and whispered desperately to the reflection staring back. This isn't me. The words sounded brittle.
Weak.
A spell spoken by someone who no longer believed in magic. My heart beat steadily in my chest. Not with panic. Not with dread. With excitement. A quiet, trembling anticipation that made my skin buzz. Only then did I realize I had been holding my breath. The exhale left me shaky. 5 minutes had long since passed. Still, I made no move to remove the clothes. I sat there, staring at the person in the mirror, the stranger who somehow looked more like me than the boy I had been pretending to be for years. And I stayed that way until the evening shadows swallowed the room. Life became divided after that. 2 versions of myself existed side by side, never touching. Inside the house, I slowly stopped resisting. I wore the leggings my mother left folded on my bed, the soft-fitted tops that appeared in my closet one by one. Sometimes loose cardigans with sleeves long enough to hide my hands. Neither of us ever spoke about it. There were no awkward conversations, no forced reassurances, just silent understanding. A truce. At first, I wore them for an hour, then 2, then entire afternoons. Eventually, I stopped changing back into my old clothes the moment I got home. The comfort was impossible to ignore. It wasn't indulgence. It was relief. But the second I had to leave the house, the disguise returned. The oversized hoodie, the loose jeans, the carefully slouched posture. Leo's armor. Every time I pulled it on, it felt heavier. like stepping back into a role I had forgotten how to play. The divide between those two selves grew sharper each day, until one crisp autumn afternoon, the barrier finally cracked. Mom needed a prescription picked up from the pharmacy downtown. It was routine, simple, an errand I'd run dozens of times. But as I stood in my room preparing to leave, something inside me rebelled. I was already dressed in charcoal gray leggings and a fitted black long-sleeve top. My hair had grown past my ears now, long enough to gather loosely at the nape of my neck. At some point, I had started tying it back without thinking, using the hair ties Mom had quietly placed on my dresser. I stared at myself in the mirror, then looked at the discarded pile of heavy jeans and my usual hoodie. And for the first time, the thought of putting them on felt unbearable, not uncomfortable.
Wrong.
The realization hit me like ice water. What if I didn't? The idea was electric. Immediate panic followed. You can't. People will stare. They'll know. They'll laugh. But another voice, small, defiant, unfamiliar, whispered back. So what if they do? My hand hovered over the jeans, then slowly fell away. Instead, I reached for the soft gray cardigan hanging in my closet. It was lightweight and open-fronted, long enough to fall past my hips and blur the lines of my body. I slipped it on, added simple sneakers, took one trembling breath, and walked out the front door. The world felt impossibly loud. Leaves scraped across the pavement. Cars rumbled somewhere in the distance. My own heartbeat thundered in my ears. Every step felt exposed. The cool air brushed against the thin fabric of the leggings, making me hyper-aware of every inch of myself. I kept my head down, certain every passerby was staring, certain they were dissecting me with every glance. But no one did. No one pointed. No one laughed. No one stopped. The world simply continued moving around me, indifferent and busy and entirely unconcerned with my existence. The realization was staggering. I wasn't the center of anyone's attention. I was just another person walking down the street. By the time I reached the pharmacy, my hands were still shaking, but something had shifted. The panic had softened. After collecting the prescription, I spotted the coffee shop next door. Warm light spilled through its windows. The thought of going straight home suddenly felt like surrender. Before I could lose my nerve, I stepped inside. The scent of coffee and sugar wrapped around me instantly. The space buzzed with quiet conversation and clinking mugs.
Safe. Ordinary.
I approached the counter and gave my order in a voice barely above a whisper, then retreated to wait, pretending to scroll on my phone. That was when I felt it.
Someone watching me.
My stomach dropped. Slowly, I looked up. A man sat near the window, dark-haired and quietly handsome, a book open in his hands.
He was looking directly at me.
And smiling. Not mockingly. Not cruelly. Warmly. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. He held my gaze for a second too long, and smiled wider. Heat flooded my face.
He knows, I thought wildly. He sees what I am.
But then understanding hit, so suddenly it nearly stole my breath. He wasn't looking at me with ridicule. He was looking at me the way men looked at women. Like I was beautiful. The thought sent my entire body into freefall. Latte for Leah. The barista's voice rang out across the room. I froze.
Leah.
That wasn't what I'd said. I'd mumbled. He'd misheard. Before I could correct him, the man by the window spoke gently. I think that's yours. My legs moved on autopilot. It's Leo, I murmured to the barista. Sorry, man, he said absently. I grabbed the cup and turned to leave, desperate to escape. But as I passed the man's table, he spoke again. I hope this doesn't sound strange, he said, his voice warm and careful. I stopped. He looked up at me with quiet sincerity. You have a very graceful way about you. The world stopped. Graceful. No one had ever called me that. I had always been awkward, too sharp, too stiff, too unsure of where my limbs belonged. Graceful was impossible, and yet hearing it made something inside me bloom. For one suspended moment, I felt seen. Not as Leo, not as a confused imitation, but as something real, something emerging. I couldn't speak. I only nodded and fled the shop, my face burning, my pulse racing. But the thrill stayed with me all the way home. Mom was waiting in the living room when I returned. She looked up as I entered, reading my face instantly, and asked only one question. Did you hate it? I stood frozen, the prescription in one hand, the untouched coffee in the other, and thought about his smile, the word graceful, the impossible exhilaration of being recognized. I couldn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence told her everything. The armor had cracked, and neither of us pretended otherwise. From there, everything changed. Not all at once.
Slowly.
Deliberately. For the first time, I began choosing. I ordered my first dress online, a simple dark blue cotton t-shirt dress. When it arrived, I locked myself in my room and slipped it on with trembling hands. The fabric skimmed my body perfectly. The hem brushed my knees. When I walked, it swayed softly against my legs like a whisper. And when I looked in the mirror, something inside me finally settled. Not panic, not confusion, recognition. This was right, not because it made me someone new, but because it revealed who I had always been. That night Mom saw me wearing it. She smiled and said nothing. We ate dinner together in quiet peace, the truth sitting between us like candlelight. No explanation needed. The war was over. Later, alone in the bathroom, I stared into my reflection and whispered the name the barista had accidentally given me.
Leah.
The sound lingered in the air, and for the first time, something inside me answered.
Yes.
From then on, Leah became real. Not overnight, but with every choice, every step, every small act of courage. The first gallery opening, the first mascara, the first stranger introducing me as Leah without hesitation, the first time a woman complimented my dress, the first time I laughed without hearing Leo's voice in my head correcting me. The more I became her, the quieter the conflict grew, until one ordinary evening, standing before the bathroom mirror wrapped in steam and silence, I wiped the glass clean and looked, really looked, and there she was. Wide dark eyes, soft jawline, grace written naturally into every line of her face. Not a stranger, not an imitation, not someone I had become, someone I had finally stopped hiding from. I touched the cool glass and smiled through tears, then whispered the truth that had been waiting my whole life to be spoken. I was never changed into someone else. I just finally stopped pretending to be him